Welcome back to Sunrise on the Hill. It is midterm Monday. Each Monday leading up to November's midterms, we break down a key race in a segment obviously called Midterm Monday because we already told you that.
Yeah. And as we head into the midterms, many issues are top of mind for voters, including the war in Iran and President Trump's influence. We're joined this morning by Democratic strategist Jamie Jackson and Republican strategist Jeff Burton.
Morning.
Hey there. Yeah, so appreciate you guys joining us. I want to start with the big story that we're all talking about, Iran here. Maybe we go to Jamie first. How do you think the war in Iran, the news today is that we see escalation, not de-escalation. This seems to be something that's going to linger around as an issue for American voters. How do you think this is going to affect the midterm elections?
This unauthorized war of choice that the president has brought the U.S. into is going to have a major impact on midterms. I would say that the president and the administration is losing the narrative on the war. However, I don't think they ever had one. We saw from the very beginning that they chose not to come to Congress, to allow Congress to use their authorization capabilities to declare war. There's been no cohesive message surrounding why they brought us into this war. They've been changing narratives. In the beginning, it was they wanted total surrender. They wanted regime change, which we haven't seen. And then there are also talks about blocking Iran from having nuclear weapons capabilities. But now the focus is totally on the Strait of Hormuz. And recently as yesterday, we saw that the president now wants to have a total blockade. So I think the narrative is changing. Costs of oil and gas are rising. And Americans are not happy with the direction that this president is taking us into with this war.
Hey, Jeff, I think it's pretty clear that no one in the country supports the Iranian regime, not Republicans, not Democrats. The problem was the way this happened. There are still a lot of questions about that, which is why they're going for War Powers, the War Powers Act. A lot of questions on why we went in. And now with the Strait of Hormuz the way it is, there's a problem that the country and the world are dealing with that wasn't a problem before. So as a strategist, as a message person, how do you see this and what should the message be Republicans are selling?
You look at Iran and U.S. foreign policy, and for the last 40 years, Iran has gotten the better of every U.S. president until now. This conflict is about nuclear enrichment, and that's why you see J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, walking away from talks this weekend, because what you've seen over the last 40 years is Iran wants to enrich nuclear uranium. They have sanctions. They do it again, sanctions, and it hasn't worked. And you look at these talks, yes, there was a ceasefire. There were talks over the weekend, and Vice President Vance and the U.S. walked away from those talks because Iran would refuse to stop enriching uranium. You look at the conflict, it's not the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, it's a tactic. It's not a cause. It's trying to shut off and end this conflict as soon as possible so that we can get gas prices down, because President Trump and Republicans are worried about affordability for Americans and want to see this help. But we have to look at the U.S. foreign policy and keeping Americans safe first, and that's what this conflict is all about.
Jeff, I want to just ask one follow-up. The refrain we've heard from a lot of elected Republicans is that we support President Trump on this, but we want this to end quickly so gas prices can come back down. With the blockade of the Strait being announced, Vice President walking away from these negotiations without a deal intact, it seems like we're seeing an escalation, not a winding down of the conflict.
You have to have an escalation when you don't have a partner in diplomacy, and that's what Iran is. They're not a good partner, and this escalation is to shut off their economy, to make the pain for them come back to the table and make a deal that is satisfactory for the American people.
Jamie, Republicans have been pointing their fingers at Democrats and basically accusing Democrats of not taking care of something that really needed to be taken care of and wasn't taken care of by previous presidents, despite the fact that there was a nuclear agreement with President Obama. How would you respond to the critics on the right?
Well, for decades, there have been bipartisan efforts with Congress to engage in more of a diplomatic approach. And that's what we had been previously doing with Iran. However, a lot of trust was broken when, during negotiations, this administration decided to strike Iran without evidence of an imminent threat. And so my advice to the administration would, again, be to go back to Congress, consult with the chairman, the ranking members of the House and Senate Foreign Affairs, Intelligence, and Armed Services Committee, and find a diplomatic off-ramp, because the approach right now is simply not working.
Quickly, Jeff, can you respond to that? Should the president have gone to Congress about this?
Yeah, and Jamie just said it, for decades. That's the key word. For decades, we've been doing this, and it's just been running around in circles with Iran getting the better of us. That's why we're in this conflict, because it's time to stop 40 years of bad U.S. foreign policy and letting Iran just control the Middle East.
Jamie, I want to ask you about what we saw at the DNC meeting last week in New Orleans. There was some controversy over the party's platform as it pertains to American relations with Israel. There had been a push to criticize AIPAC and put some guardrails on U.S. aid to Israel being conditional on some certain policies, and also to recognize the Palestinian state. How are Democrats going to handle this issue moving into the midterm elections that has really become a divisive issue among some Democratic voters?
Well, this is definitely going to be a continuing conversation in the lead up to midterms, as well as the 2028 election. There's a lot going on here with regard to how the DNC is engaging with U.S.-Israel relations, with AIPAC. And I think that there's a complex, broader amount of issues at play. You have the impact of the previous administration's position on Gaza that may have impacted Kamala Harris's election. You have whether or not the U.S. should maintain as close of a security partnership with U.S. and Israel. And you also have another conversation about what's happening around outside influence in general with elections. So I think there are a number of issues at play, and Democratic leaders in the DNC want to continue to grapple with those issues internally, as well as focus on what the voters really care about right now, which is the affordability crisis that this administration is putting us into. However, leading up to the midterms as well as 2028, Democrats as well as the Republicans are going to have to take a more of a definitive stance on these issues.
Jamie, is the AIPAC thing a bit of a conundrum for Democrats? Because clearly Democrats would like to keep their Jewish constituents happy, but there is a lot of pull, on the sides of the party to get out and get out of Israel and to disassociate themselves from AIPAC.
The caucus, as well as the American public, there are a lot of varying positions on this issue with regarding AIPAC's influence, as well as U.S.-Israel relationship. You obviously have progressives and younger voters wanting to pull back. And then you also have establishment Democrats, as well as strong U.S.-Israel supporters that want to continue. But again, this is going to be an issue that the caucus and party leaders are going to really have to take to heart moving into the midterms in 2028, because I don't think it's as simple as deciding on a black and white resolution on how to proceed on this.
Jeff, do Republicans have a similar hot potato in their party when you have some of the biggest microphones on the conservative side, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, others in the conservative kind of podcast ecosystem, speaking out against Israel, which has traditionally been an issue that unites the Republican Party?
There's always going to be some conflict within parties, but going back to what we talked about Democrats and what Jamie was saying is that this is just another item and another issue that the Democratic base cannot be satisfied. You see it with a split from Israel with AIPAC, and that, like Jamie said, that's one of the reasons that Kamala Harris lost Michigan, because you look at the pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian fight within the party, and everybody wants to talk about the Republican fights and these conflicts, and because we're the party in power, but you don't see that the Democratic base just won't be satisfied. I read a story last week that the progressives are mad at AOC because she's gone too mainstream, and when AOC is too mainstream, you know your party has a problem.
All righty, guys. Democratic strategist Jamie Jackson, Republican strategist Jeff Burton. We're really grateful you were with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.